Taiwan has a new president, and at Lai Ching Te's inauguration, he called for China to dial back its confrontational stance. China is dependent on the island for the latest in computer chips, and the majority of Taiwan's exports go to China. So, despite the tension, will it be business as usual? Joining me now is Zsuzsa Ferenczy, Assistant Professor at National Donghua University in Taiwan. Thank you very much for joining us. What do you think, when it comes to the business and economic side, what's the status quo between China and Taiwan, first of all, and will Mr. Lai change any of that?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. So let's start with today's inauguration of who follows Tsai Ing-wen, the previous president who was in power for 8 years, a period through which Taiwan's status and Taiwan's profile globally has really changed. So in that context, cross-strait relations have also become quite tense. China has become more assertive, using all kinds of ways to pressure Taiwan, to intimidate and to shrink Taiwan's international space. So Lai Ching Te, as he takes power, he will face just as an assertive China as we've seen in the past 8 years. And this comes with a lot of elements of uncertainty. But on his side, what he did today was to kind of pass on the same message that democracy is the core feature that defines the identity of Taiwan. And this is also the element that will connect Taiwan to the world, because Taiwan is a Taiwan of the world. And this is a quote from him from this morning. But it's also something that Tsai Ing-wen herself said, which means that he is likely to continue the legacy of the previous president. And also he did stress that he will fight to maintain the status quo and to ensure peace and stability in the region.
Okay, I think many people, they don't necessarily realize how closely economically tied the two sides are across the strait. And he has said that he wants peace and he wants cooperation. But do you see Mr. Lai as someone who can ease tensions across the strait?
So far what we have is the platform that he ran on, which was one that would pursue peace and stability and dialogue and engagement at the expense of rather than confrontation, cooperation rather than confrontation. So this is how he ran as a candidate, and I expect, and he is likely to continue on the same platform, but it takes two. So as far as Taiwan is concerned, I think it's been very clear that the people of Taiwan want peace, and they also want to simply exist under the government that they democratically elect. Now, your question is whether he is going to be able to do that. As I said, I think it takes two, but I think I am confident enough to say that the determination and also the calm I believe the idea that comes out of Taiwan, and not just the government, but also civil society and the people of Taiwan, is that the future together is one only can go forward only if there's peace in the region. And I think there's also very clear understanding in Taiwan and outside of Taiwan that whatever happens in Taiwan and in the Taiwan Strait will have global implications. Now, China is equally interested in peace and stability, but we also know that for Beijing, Taiwan is an issue of national concern and of core interest, and therefore also in its relations with other countries, China has made it clear that Taiwan cannot be discussed. Now, going back to how Lai can navigate this relationship and also cross-strait relations, is that I think it was very skillfully done in the past 8 years, and likely Lai will continue that Taiwan has become a much more international space, if I can say so. The status of Taiwan is something to be determined between China and Taiwan, so the people and the governments on both sides of the strait. But Taiwan being so international and having such a global profile, Beijing will not be able to just do whatever it wants across the strait, because the Taiwan Strait is not national waters for China. These are international waters, key shipping routes. So everyone's interested in contributing to securing peace and stability across the strait.
Okay, I want to just jump on something that you mentioned there about global implications. So just zooming out here, what's the EU's stance here? So on the one hand, Taiwan is strategically important with its computer chip supply. And on the other hand, the EU doesn't want to damage its trade relations with China. So what's the EU perspective on this?
Right, so that is a good question. So let's just look at where EU-China relations are and perhaps try to shift away from seeing Taiwan through a China lens. But I will start with a discussion on EU-China. So far, we've seen in the past few years a clear deterioration in EU-China relations, and that's connected to the fact that China has become increasingly assertive. And the latest shift and acceleration in that deterioration has been China's support to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, Europe in these years has also increased its relationship with Taiwan, because Taiwan's image has increased as kind of the opposite of China, in the sense of it proved itself to be a reliable partner, trustworthy partner, and a friend. This is also something that Lai Ching Te has stressed today, that Taiwan can be and is a friend to other democracies in the world. So Europe has shifted its stance. Now, we also need to be very mindful here that although there is a shift in Europe's stance on how it pushes back against Chinese assertiveness, at the same time, Europe or the EU as such does not take a position on Taiwan's status. So Europe and the EU has a one China policy, according to which it recognizes the PRC as the sole legal government of China, and it maintains cooperation and relations with Taiwan. This has not changed. And I think what has changed is this pushback that we see from Europe against Chinese efforts to undermine Taiwanese democracy, peace and stability in the region. And because there are global implications, Europe is taking a different position. But we have to be realistic that the European Union is 27 countries. So serious divisions and deep divisions remain. But this is a process. And I think this shift that we're seeing is one that is irreversible. The European Union is really developing itself a Taiwan narrative, if I may say so. This was really facilitated through parliamentary diplomacy. The European Parliament has played a key role. Member states individually have reached out and engaged Taiwan more. And I think more important than this, or perhaps equally important, is the fact that not only has Taiwan reciprocated this, but Taiwan has also tried to position itself. And I think, again, this is something that was done very skillfully by the previous president, but also it was done in cooperation with civil society. So people-to-people contact remain important, and all of this is likely to continue under Lai Ching Te.
So you're expecting that EU nations, not the EU as a whole institution, but certain EU nations are going to increasingly move towards recognizing Taiwan as a country and treating it as such and having trade relations as such directly with Taiwan, regardless what the broader EU policy is and regardless what China thinks about that. Like you said, not looking at Taiwan through the China lens. Are more countries going to do this in the EU, do you think?
So let me just go back to the previous explanation there, or as I try to be as clear as possible on this, because as I said, the EU and member states do not take a position on Taiwan status. This is not up for member states to decide. So we're not discussing in the future or in the past. We did not think about how to deal with China, with Taiwan as a country or not. This is not our business to decide on. This is, as I said, something that needs to be dealt with in the cross-strait context through peaceful means by both sides. Of course, the EU is interested that this is done through peaceful means. And what we're seeing is a China that is increasingly willing and ready to use coercion, hybrid warfare, to undermine Taiwan and to shrink Taiwan's international space. So what I think we'll be seeing, and what we have seen in the past 3-4 years in light of the pandemic and also China's support to Russia in its aggression against Ukraine, is more engagement, more cooperation. along the same lines. So nothing in the direction of recognizing or not recognizing Taiwan as a country, but upholding our own rights in the EU as sovereign member states and the EU as a whole to cooperate with Taiwan. I think we, in the past, as the European Union and member states, have not really been very clear about the language that we use, and China has easily pushed back and also manipulated the narrative coming out of Taiwan, out of the EU, that we violate our relationship with China. But in fact, we have been, but perhaps, as I said, perhaps not clear enough, but the shift is there now, that there's more clarity in the EU's language, that we are interested in stable cross-strait relations, and we want peace and stability in the region, and we will assert our right to cooperate with Taiwan as a partner. Taiwan, in exchange and on its own initiative and exercising actually agency, has also proved that it can be, and it is a partner, a reliable partner. And I expect this to continue under Lai Ching Te.
Okay, but some countries are going kind of in the opposite direction. So talking specifically about China now and not about relations with Taiwan, but of course it all fits together, right? We've seen Hungary and Prime Minister Viktor Orban reach out to China. President Xi saying the two nations were on a golden voyage together. Hungary is also a big supporter of the Belt and Road project. So do you see greater divisions within the EU on dealing with China?
Divisions have been there dealing with China in the European Union. This is not new. Beijing has thrived on amplifying these divisions, exploiting the country's lack of convergence. Now, again, going back to that shift that I explained earlier, is that I think there is more pushback, and member states do agree that there needs to be a way to rebalance relations with China. I think there is agreement, but we also have to be realistic that member states do pursue their national interest. And I think this will be the case going forward, even if the convergence between member states will strengthen. Beijing has skillfully managed to reach out to bilaterally to member states, and to try to do that by undermining the EU. So this is in China's interest, and this has always been the case. Recently, as the EU has become a bit more assertive, and I think this really strengthened in light of China's support again to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has been a continuous support. And instead of playing a constructive role, in Europe's view, China is facilitating and is helping Russia to help the aggression. So I believe that member states will continue to deal with China. And it's not only Hungary. I believe that it is every single member state. But again, there are groups of countries or regions within the EU that are more aware and more willing to consider the security risks that come with cooperation with China. And the challenge will be for the European Commission and for the EU to strengthen this convergence and to build on it. It will be China's interest to keep the European Union divided. But of course, I think it's useless to keep blaming China for dividing the European Union if member states don't have the political will to push back. So it is up to member states to kind of try to capitalize on this convergence that we are seeing. There's a level of unity that really has strengthened following the invasion of Ukraine when it comes to Russia, but that unity is clearly not present when it comes to China. But we do have a European Commission that is more assertive also in working out a defensive toolbox. I think we are seeing a willingness to use that toolbox, and that is also, again, thanks to China in a way, because China's assertiveness has not materialized only in the Indo-Pacific, but it has also reached the European Union and its member states and our European interest. So going forward, it will be a challenge to see how countries can deal with China and have a unified message, a European message, while some countries will continue to undermine that. It's
just one of those topics that touches on everything when it comes to geopolitics, trade, economics, business, absolutely everything. So we'll definitely be returning to this on DW. Zsuzsa Ferenczy, Assistant Professor at the National Donghua University in Taiwan. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks for having me.